All right, happy Sunday night, guys. I am so grateful to be joined by my good friend Kyle, my libertarian friends. Good to see you, Kyle. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing great, buddy. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. And then Chris, my liberal friend. How are you, Chris?
Doing really well. The weather's not the greatest right now. We've had some really nice warm summer weather, and
Yeah,
now it's like California is remembering that it's April, so we're getting a little bit of rain. But
yeah.
other than that, doing well.
In Florida, it's that sweet spot between, the moving out of winter, which we barely even have a winter, but it does get a little bit cold at times, so you can't really go to the beach. It's windy. And then, of course, there's like the dreaded July and August heat, which is just scorching. It's like the angry sun from Super Mario. We're in that sweet spot between the two, so it's like perfect. There was a line of cars like over a mile long just headed to the beach today. So it's just like wonderful. But then in 2 weeks, I'm going to be suffering, like, just dying. So
Yep.
it's a great time though, man. I got my finished up the vaccine, so I'm just like over the mask deal. So now I just like walk into stores and I'm like, challenge me, like I can't wait to tell you. We're doing that at church as well. We're having all kinds of people come back, so we're back up to like a normal attendance and all that stuff. So it feels like life is going back to normal, and I'm so excited. So, and that means, with this show, I hope we're reaching more and more people. There's so much to talk about. We spent so many months talking about COVID and all of that, and now we can get into all kinds of fun topics. Um, Another exciting thing that I can't wait to do here in just a second is to introduce a new guest. So, for the past, what has it been now, 3 or 4 months? Since we started this project, it's been the three of us going back and forth, and I've been struggling to represent the conservative side, and so I brought some help. So I want to introduce Megan. Megan, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Hi, good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We are so grateful to have you. You've been following the show now for, I think, at least a few weeks. Your comments have been awesome. I know you've been piping into the Wednesday show, and we've been looking, for somebody else to add to this program, and now we got a full house. I'm very excited to have you on, and I need the help as a conservative because we're constantly debating deep stuff. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself? Let us, where do you live, generally speaking, and how long have you been a conservative, and what brought you to the show? Would be a couple of questions I have.
Sure. I live in the Louisville, Kentucky area. Um, how long have I been a conservative? That's a good question. Um, I've gone back and forth a few times, but I would say now, maybe a good 8 years or so.
Okay.
When I was in undergrad, I was a liberal, but I saw some things that I really didn't like, and so kind of switched away from that. Um, my background is in fine arts, visual arts, so I'm not an expert of politics or American history, but I try to pay attention more and more now because of everything that's going on. And
Sure.
I was an Army brat too, so.
There's a lot of material to get into there. I know, Chris, your story is a little similar, but you went from conservative to liberal, right? I think we've talked about that before.
Yeah, a little bit younger than college. I grew up somewhat conservative politically. It was really around high school that I started, I guess, experimenting with liberalism,
Yeah.
if you want to call it that. And have basically stayed on that side, although I've kind of pivoted between maybe the more progressive, maybe even socialist ends to like more centrist liberalism where I am now.
Yeah. We've got about a
He reads Marx one time and becomes a progressive, man. What a sad.
I've actually never read Marx.
You're not missing anything. Let's put it that
Nor
way.
have I seen the Marx Brothers, but I don't know if there's a connection there.
We've got about a half dozen folks that are watching live in drug.
Oh, we lost our host.
no.
Okay.
Oh no,
No.
that's all right. Are we still?
All right,
Are we?
Kyle,
That's
it's on
okay.
you.
Well, let's assume that we're still live, and that's cool. So, all right. So, Megan,
Maggie Moore now the new
asked you earlier what favorite
pressure.
president, least favorite president. Who you got?
Favorite, I'm gonna go with Trump. Least
Okay,
favorite,
cool.
it's a little tougher.
Yeah.
I don't know. I quickly Googled worst presidents. So
Listen, if Woodrow Wilson did not make your list, that's
Hmm.
by far the worst president we've ever had.
I would agree. I would
Yeah.
agree that Wilson is one of the worst.
Isn't that crazy that a libertarian and a liberal and almost every conservative I know would all say that Woodrow Wilson was the worst?
And
He
a
was so
lot of
bad.
liberals I know would
Yeah.
say that Woodrow Wilson was the worst.
Yeah.
As far
Yeah.
as his like reintroduced a lot of like segregation policies that had
Yeah.
already been like eliminated
Yeah,
at
extremely
the
racist.
federal
Yeah.
level. Even
Yeah.
for his time.
The father of modern progressivism. So, for me, that's got to be
In a way,
the downfall.
yeah, he definitely
Yeah.
he was like the League of Nations guy, right?
Yeah. But
Yeah,
not just
so
that.
like,
I mean, progressivism in terms of all sorts of what I would call progressive policies today, like eugenics and any number of other things.
he was a big government regulation guy, from what I understand.
Yeah, it's not surprising.
Hoover too,
That's
right?
cool.
Hoover would be one of the worst, maybe guy right before the Great Depression.
I mean, I think so. The Animaniacs song taught me that Hoover got the blame. Yeah, I think is Wes trying to come back on here. Maybe. Okay, that's all right. We'll keep talking about Hoover. Yeah. So Hoover. Well, while we're talking about it, Chris, who's your favorite and least favorite president?
Man, I gotta say, I'm very far away from Megan on this because I would rank Trump as one of the worst, maybe not the worst. That could just be recency bias.
I think it's recency bias. Yeah, I think when history comes out, he won't be as bad as we
yeah. If I want to give a full view here, probably Hoover and Wilson and Andrew Jackson too. Andrew Jackson because of his crimes against
was
Native Americans.
Yeah.
There we go. All right, I'm on my way back.
Are you back? Are we still live? Because we've been talking like we're live. I don't know if that's true or not.
You are. All right. 1 second. I'm working through a new camera today, so this
Expect the unexpected on Refounding Fathers.
That's right.
That's it.
Go for it.
that's a good thing. Buchanan came up as one of the worst when I quickly looked.
Is he the one that was for a while? Like,
you mean he was
Like
the
Lincoln.
president kind of fostered or fomented Confederate rebellion, really. So
right.
the president right before the Civil War.
All right. I'm going to use
Right.
Yeah.
my camera went out here.
Who was the one that like died like 32 days in?
That would be William Henry Harrison.
Okay.
How do you praise that guy was dead in 30 days? I'm telling you, for my AP U.S. history class in high school, we had to watch the Animaniacs President song every day. And I'm 34. I literally 17 years ago I had to watch. I can still sing the whole thing front to back. And yeah. So yeah.
Just watching the new
James
Animaniacs
Buchanan. Yeah.
for the first time because they rebooted it recently and it was pretty funny.
Oh yeah, I saw they rebooted it. I didn't watch any of it, but pretty good. Yeah.
What's Wes doing?
William Henry Harrison, if someone were to ask me what my favorite president is, he would probably, as a joke, I usually say William Henry Harrison because he had the good sense to die before he could screw anything up. For that,
Can you guys hear me okay?
Pretty high on my list.
He should be a model for future presidential term limits. 30 days. That's all you get.
Yeah, amen and amen to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can
I can hear you.
Okay, good deal. All right. So sorry, yeah, my camera went out. I'm actually upgrading to a new one, so I apologize.
I got you.
All right, let's get into so
I guess are we still live? Are we live right now?
Yeah. So let me
Oh, cool. All right. Well, good.
over here. So there we go. All right, we'll switch to this one. So thank you guys for keeping
That
it
I didn't say what I really thought.
Well,
Good.
Well, I troubleshot.
I think we're getting our highest ratings ever.
There we go. So picking up kind of where we left off is what I want to do is transition into more of a host role to allow Megan to fulfill that conservative role. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to getting her thoughts as we move forward on this. And specifically as we pick up with our topics for what we were doing last week, which we've been talking about guns and immigration, and especially within Biden's policies and his administration. As we talked about last week, there's essentially a crisis going on now. And I mean, what a shift we've seen going from what Trump was doing and making this his top issue over to Biden and just a completely different take on this. And that's been fascinating for me to watch. I think there's a lot of ways to look at this. But first, I would kind of ask Megan, as someone who has become a conservative since you were in college to now, what would your views on immigration be? And does Trump appeal to you, and where the GOP is today? In terms of their stance on immigration, how do you feel about that?
Yes, I do agree a lot more with Trump's policies. I don't, from a broad standpoint, I don't agree with this. What's going on now, this crisis that we have now, because of the simple fact that we have a lot of problems going on here amongst ourselves, you know, amongst Americans that have been here. And so, we've got a poorer public education system. Now we have all these problems with the police. Police are quitting, left and right. We have a media that has no accountability. We have mental health problems, going higher and higher. And until we can fix these things, I don't think that we should be letting anywhere near this amount of people in, especially when they're undocumented. We've had the economy has kind of tanked since we've had COVID, and these people get to come in without having even been tested for COVID. It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, no, that picks up exactly where we left off. So what are your thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, I think there is an important balance we do have to strike between compassion and safety. And so I would also want anyone crossing even state lines, regardless of national borders, to be tested for COVID. Other than that, I don't necessarily think that adding to our population will worsen any problems that we have now as a country. Nor do I think it necessarily needs to detract from our ability to tackle those problems. I think that immigrants, for the most part, add a lot of benefits to our country and to our economy. And I think that there's not necessarily a reason to push that to the side. Even if we do want, we can say we want to focus on America's problems first, but immigrants can help us solve some of those problems.
Yeah. And then, I think about immigration as one of the issues that tends to divide libertarians and conservatives. I remember I've read so many different libertarian publications. I mean, you can look at the think tanks like Cato, and they are very pro immigration, right? They are very much an open borders type philosophy. And like we've been talking about today, most conservatives aren't. So where do you stand on that, Kyle?
Yeah, generally speaking, I'm for more immigration. Obviously, I think there should be some sort of control or some sort of, limits, or maybe not even limits, just some sort of way to control and document who is coming and where they are, kind of their background, their history, that sort of thing. I mean, there's a story, not long ago, it was last week actually, where with a Mexican drug cartel in my neighborhood, like in Union County where I live, like that's pretty wild. And of course, that's not representative of every Mexican, not even the most, or even a little bit. But there is something to be said about knowing, who the people are that are coming here, and that sort of thing. I mean, I even mentioned last week that I am very sympathetic to people growing up and people living in parts of the world where they long to come to America for the opportunity and for the possibility of making a better future for them and their family. And we should be willing to accept those things. And like Chris said, I definitely tend to more of the let's let them in because these are people who can work and contribute and solve a lot of our problems.
Yeah, I understood the traditional conservative take when I was a kid. I was a story for that is that I was working in a lawn care business, one of my first jobs, and the guy that I was working for was paying us minimum wage. We're kids in middle school and high school at the time, and I'd been working for him all summer. And towards the end, I saw him just really depressed. And he was telling me that he wasn't going to be able to hire us in the next summer, most likely, because he was going to have to start pulling much longer shifts and being much more choosy about who he could and couldn't hire. He was just going to have to work a lot harder. And I asked why, and he said, well, there are now numerous different countries that are starting to compete with him, or companies that are starting to compete with him. And he said most of them are illegal immigrants who don't pay
Yeah.
taxes. They work 7 days a week. The only time they do pay taxes is when they're buying equipment, right? And then they're able to essentially undersell him, right? They're able to charge a lot less, and they do it all in cash, and
Yeah.
they're cutting grass really quick. Whereas he's sitting here trying to do the standard model of working Monday through Friday and paying taxes for his equipment and filing as an LLC and all of these different things. And he's like, if I'm going to continue operating legally, then there's no way that I can run this business the way that I want when I'm up against that. So I guess the question is, and that's one of the things about this issue, is that it seems like when it's in the national discourse, people tend to say, well, you either want these people to be here and to have access to everything, or you want to kick them out of the country, right? And you hate them. And it seems like there's this middle ground. Like it's not bad that those people are in the country contributing to the economy. What's bad is that they're not following the laws and they're able to
Yeah.
operate the way that they're doing without, adhering to the restrictions that we would put on any business. And it seems like that is
Yeah, I think
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, Wes. And this is the largest voting bloc, new voting demographic in the country is Hispanics, right? And typically speaking, these are people who are very religious, very conservative in terms of social values, in terms of family, marriage, abortion, things like that. And Republicans, especially under the Trump administration, have done everything they can to ostracize and alienate what is the largest growing voting bloc in the country. That's crazy to me. It's the same thing that happened to Muslims after 9/11. Muslims pre 9/11 were super, super conservative, very reliably Republican. After 9/11, you couldn't buy their votes if you wanted to. And Republicans really have to play smart if they want to be competitive at all in the future, because again, largest voting demographic in the country here.
Let me let Megan respond to that. So do you feel like conservatives are alienating themselves from minorities?
No, no, not really, because there are a lot of Hispanic people that have come here that have gone through the paperwork, that have gone through and done everything that they were supposed to do. And now to me, it's kind of like they're getting slapped in the face, because now these people just get to come in and they don't have to worry about doing anything. So to me, it's also not fair to those people that have done it how they were supposed to do it from the beginning.
Yeah.
And then, it's also, the borders with Mexico, but that doesn't mean that everybody coming in is Mexican. And I've talked to some Mexican Americans, and they've said, well, now we have all these other people in Mexico too, because they're coming from south of Mexico.
Right.
And so now they have this issue too. If we're talking philosophically, yes, it would be great to be able to help all of these people, but I'm thinking right now it's just not the time for us until we fix things more.
What I would add to that is you mentioned there's more than just Mexicans that are coming to the southern border. You think about Cuba, right? You think about Venezuela and refugees that are coming in from those countries. They're coming from socialism, right? And just look at Venezuela today if you want to see the abject failure of socialism on a national scale. Just
Yep.
absolutely hard broke their economy for decades, right? And so people that are coming from a socialist economy, they see somebody like Bernie Sanders up there talking about being a democratic socialist. They want nothing to do with that, hence Trump going hard to the right, including in areas that have traditionally been Democrat. I mean, he won Florida more this past cycle than he did against Hillary, and it wasn't really that close because Republicans appealed to immigrants on the basis of, well, you want to go back, you want this country to become what you left, vote Democrat. You want it to be different, vote Republican. So what are your thoughts on that, Chris?
Well, I would quibble with the idea. I think like Bernie Sanders' socialist policies are a lot closer to what they have in like the Scandinavian countries than like Venezuela. Like South of Latin American socialism is very different in kind from like European socialism.
Yeah.
But I think you all do have a point that Republicans can compete for the Hispanic vote and for the votes of many other minority groups. We actually saw Trump did pick up some support among Hispanic men in particular in 2020 relative to 2016. Part of that, I think, was he just ran a much less immigration based and xenophobia based campaign in 2020. It just didn't come up nearly as much as it did in 2016. But I also think it's important to look back on the history, as you allude to, that in the past, we had people like Bush and Reagan who were much more favorable to immigration. And the theory back then was, we pull these people from Cuba, we take as many refugees as we can, we make them American, and we beat Cuba in the realm of ideas. That was kind of the theory of immigration back then. And I think it's really interesting that that is not the theory now. And I think that has a lot to do with just the lack of trust in American institutions these days. As Megan alludes to, like, Americans don't trust the media, they don't trust the police. And this used to be something that was a lot more common among liberals. But now this kind of lack of trust in American institutions, I think, is more prominent on the right. We had that whole deep state narrative under Trump. We have people not trusting public health officials. And I think that has made people kind of have this insecurity regarding immigration, that they're going to bring their ideas and their problems here, and that we cannot really assimilate and make them American, that maybe America is not strong enough to do that anymore. Yeah. And I think that really is deeply revealing about some problems in our society, not necessarily problems with the immigrants themselves.
Yeah. When I was younger, America was, the term I used to describe America was a melting pot. And then somewhere in my teenage years or 20s, we got transitioned to a mosaic, right? And it's interesting you say that the idea was to bring immigrants from Cuba, Latin America, wherever, into America and to assimilate them and to make them Americans, right? And that's how we win the war of ideas. How do you do that when half the country, at least, is saying that America is fundamentally a terrible country? Fundamentally, at our core, we are a racist country. We are an evil country. We are terrible. How do we say, look, this is how we become Americans. This is what we want you to be, when we say we're awful to begin with?
Right. Yeah.
Well, I think that you do that by proving them wrong. I think the absolute wrong thing to do is to prove them right. My cat tries to jump into the shot all the time too, Megan. I think the absolute wrong thing to do is to go totally the other way and prove them right. But I think the problem goes deeper than that. I think it's not necessarily even a left versus right issue. I think it's the fact that we don't have a monoculture as a country anymore, just because of the way that our media is fractured, the way that our society is still in many ways segregated. Highest trust in the media was when there were only 3 networks. Now anyone can go to whatever YouTube channel they want and learn whatever they want and tell them whatever they want to believe, and trust in the media is at an all-time low. So, and no one's watching the same shows. Like the water cooler show is pretty much over. So I think that in a lot of ways has a deeper effect on the idea of assimilation and the idea of the melting pot than anything that any like state actor or politician could say or do.
Well, and then, the last wrinkle to this that I would add is how many Americans could pass a test to be able to immigrate to this country. We're at a time now where so many people don't have a fundamental or basic awareness of what or who America is, right? And if we as a country can't define ourselves, then how can we even expect people to be able to adopt the narrative, right? So there are numerous different problems here I see that we have internally that I agree with Megan that we need some more resolution to before we start, more of an open borders type policy. So let me give Megan the last word on this. We really appreciate you coming onto the show, and we're so grateful to have, a new voice to add. But in terms of what we've been talking about here and the points that you've seen from Chris and Kyle and the problems that we have, What would you say? What would you say is something that America can do in a positive way to try to get some more clarity on this issue? If you could make that decision, what's one thing that you would recommend that we do?
Well, I mean, you mean going back to the other problems I think that we have?
Sure. Yeah. And so
So,
you talked about how with COVID and everything else that's going on, right? Like it's not a great time to be able to focus on immigration. We've added other parts to that, our identity crisis as a country, the political divide, as Kyle was talking about. What's a way that we can begin to heal from those things to get to a point where immigration would be something that we could be more open to?
I think a huge part of that would be education. I think we really need to take a look at our public school system. Um, it wasn't great before COVID, and now it's just kind of plummeted in many ways. Not to say that there aren't a lot of good teachers in schools and that, but in the public school system, it's just kids aren't being taught what I think they should be taught. And even what Kyle mentioned, we don't even know certain things about American history that used to be taught, and now they're not being taught at all, which I think probably leads into a lot of Americans' disdain for America.
That's
and if
such a good point. Yeah, such a good point. Yeah. Keep going.
I just don't see how we can educate all of these immigrants when we can't even educate our own kids well enough.
There's a crisis in education going on in my area of Florida. Just in the past week, is that they've and maybe I'll talk about that next episode. Is they have rolled out some new curriculum at the kindergarten level, things that my kid is going to be taught next year, and it literally got so heated at the school board meeting when they did this that 4 parents had to be escorted out by the sheriff and cops. They had to be taken from the meeting because they were so angry at what they were seeing from the draft material. And this is for kindergarten. This is not college or high school. This is for like tiny little kids. And maybe I'll roll that out next time and we can kind of talk about that, because when you talk about it, this issue being linked to education, I 100% agree with you. And maybe that's, to Chris's point, as well as to Kyle's, is maybe we have to start there. If we can get some type of agreement, at the education system, then we can get to a point where, okay, now we share that with people that are coming in. I think that's a great point. So thank you guys so much for being on the show. Thanks for rolling with the technical difficulties that we had and being considerate with that. I'm going to bring it back here to our main panel here. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Megan, for being a guest on the show and joining us. We got a lot more to say. Obviously, a lot more to say when it comes to immigration, adding education in, and of course, Kyle promoting. There it is. Dinner. We'll have to get into that on our next show, as well as gun rights is something that we'll be jumping into. Thank you, Kyle. But appreciate everybody.
You're welcome,
live,
man.
rolled with us through. We're going to get back onto our normal schedule of 8:30 Central getting next week. Love to have you back, Megan, if you're willing, and we will see you folks then.
Thank you for having me.
You bet.